Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Economist Events webinar on a fascinating and timely topic, how the way we connect with one another is changing. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Mission Winnow, for making this event possible. We will be taking questions during the event. There's a Q&A function, so if you put them in there, if they're for a particular panelist, just say so, and I'll be directing those questions during the hour that we're talking. And there will also be polling questions. So what you can do when they pop up in front of you is you'll have 45 seconds to answer them, and then I'll be sharing those results with the panel and asking them what they think they would have answered if it was them. We're going to be recording the event, and from a half an hour after we finish, you'll be able to access the on-demand recording on the event website. Well, I've every moderator's dream panel here with me. I've not just got people with deep and rich experience, I've got a very interesting collection of varied viewpoints too. The full biographies are all available on the event website, but just so you can see what I mean, we've got Marian Salzman, who's Senior Vice President for Communications at Philip Morris International. And she has a very long career in advertising and PR. We've got Polly Curtis, who was a journalist at The Guardian, HuffPost UK, and now Tortoise, and is soon to move to PA, the UK's news agency. And Johann is my third panelist. He is an engineer by training, and he's Vice President at the moment for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Slack. And he used to work for Dropbox and Google. So we've got a PR person, a journalist, and an engineer by training, and we've got a great topic. No moderator could ask for better than that. Well, it seems a bit redundant to introduce a topic like the changes in the way that we communicate by saying, wow, they're changing a lot, but they kind of are. It's a revolution. And the last several months to me have felt like a forced march in that revolution. And that's come after a lot of very speedy change already, and we were already wondering what the impact would be on the world of work, on our personal lives, on things like business travel, and in particular sectors, I would pull out education and healthcare. And we'll be talking about the impacts and the prospects in those fields and others, and what those changes to communication and information technology mean for us as workers and as people. How we can forge new ways to combine personal and business. And to me, very importantly, how we can make sure that those changes are reflective rather than just reactive, how we can think about what we're doing as we're doing it. Well, I'm going to start by asking all my panelists to respond to the same question, and it's one that we at The Economist are thinking about very intensively, and within the events team in particular. We've all learned over the last several months how much we can do remotely, and it's more than we would have dreamed possible, I think, a year ago. What will you bring back with you from this period of forced innovation when we return to being able to do things in person, which eventually I suppose we will be able to? So what will each of you bring back with you? Polly, I think I'll start with you if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. So one of the things I'm really bad at is keeping boundaries between work and real life. And I think being at home with the kids crawling all over the place and trying to do several jobs at once, that has really tested that. And it's made me be much more mindful of that. And to really have kind of space where I'm working, times when I'm working and times when I'm not. And it's really shown me how bad I've been at that through all my career, how much I look at my phone when the kids are around, how much I worry about the kids when I'm in a meeting, you know. So I think kind of really compartmentalizing life more, whether I'm in an office full time or working at home more, but actually being much more mindful about my purpose from hour to hour rather than mixing those things up. That's the dream.
Do you have any sort of hints, like have you specifics that you've learned that help?
I think it's the really simple stuff that we all know we should do, but don't. We just put the phone down, take it out of the room, lock it in another room, use the silent button. I've become much better at managing communications with different teams, I think. I've been much more mindful about, emailing late at night, which I've always done to mop up a day's work at the end of a day and set up the next morning. I now kind of use the timing buttons on emails more. There's really kind of tedious stuff, but actually, if you get those to send first thing in the morning, your teams don't think they have to respond right now. And why is she emailing me in the middle of the night? Things like that. Just being a lot more mindful about how you're intruding on each other's times more.
And Johann, what about you? That was interesting that Polly had a quite technical fix to that. And I guess that's what you think about all day. I think engineers are like that.
Yeah,
I think you might still be on
mute. And, let's potentially sort of, I don't know, maybe try a role reversal here, and I'll give a non-technical answer. So I think for me, what I'll take away is the office is just no longer the gold standard of productivity. Yeah, I think I have really come to realize, and a little bit, I have to admit to my own surprise, there are a lot of teams which are actually more productive right now than they used to be before. I'm like fun fact, so to speak. I had a conversation with a customer from Germany earlier this week. Germany, some of you may know, very decentralized country, lots of small cities everywhere. And if you do business there, in the past, you had to travel an awful lot, because whoever you wanted to talk with, the one thing was sure is they weren't in the same city like you. That has gone totally away from them, and that customer sits there and says, my team has become so much more productive. And I think the job we now all have going forward is to say, okay, if the office is no longer the gold standard, what is the gold standard? And I think it is a combination of a reimagined office, a thorough work from home strategy, and then, yes, and here I'm coming back to technology and tools, the right tool set to support our teams, both in the office and as they work remotely.
And what about you, Marian?
So I have a really different take on it. To me, I think we've finally killed the agrarian clock. This idea that we should rise with the sun and wind down our workday as the sun sets, and instead recognize that we have a 24-hour day to parse out. We probably all need between 6 and 8 hours of quality sleep, and all the rest of that time is time for you to work, to learn, to grow, to relate. So it becomes a very fluid situation in which you can take those hours and get so much more into a day or a night. I mean, as an American who was telecommuting back to Europe for much of the early part of the pandemic, I got up at 3:30 in the morning. My workday was finished at 1:30, and it was absolutely luxurious, all the extra things I could get into a day.
You're clearly not someone who needs that much sleep, and clearly not living with people who interrupt you all the time.
No, I think that's the other thing that people do have to build in, though, is their own self-imposed boundaries. No, I hid myself in my office, and when I was working and when I wasn't working, I was totally available, which is both sides were different, I think, as Polly said.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's the combination of both, isn't it? And I suppose I should answer this question for myself as well. I think I agree with all the things you said. And one of the things that I'll bring back with me, though, is how much in person does matter, too, for the right things. I do feel that in particular for events, like fantastic though this is, and though we have run events where we couldn't possibly have done them if we had to get everybody into a room, there's something magical about being in a room sometimes too. Right, the next thing I wanted to ask my panelists to think about is, I was thinking about all the noise that there is online. There's more noise all the time. You know, there's more channels, there's more social media, there's more interruption, there's more emails, and it suddenly made me think of that thing that we say, that traffic is other people. You know, when you're sitting in the traffic jam and you're thinking, where the hell are all these people going? Well, you're one of them and you're going somewhere, so why do you think you're different? And all three of us, I think, or all four of us really, including me, have to think about getting people's attention in this busy world, but we're part of the busyness for other people. So, I mean, maybe I'll just go in the same order, really. I'll start with you, Polly. I mean, what does news mean in this very noisy, very busy, traffic-filled online space?
And if it's okay, I'll take that in two parts. One, talk about the general trends in news, and then talk about what Tortoise has been that. And I think we've seen two distinct phases for news organisations since the digital revolution. The first was the kind of arms race in noise, and that was all the news brands really chasing traffic wherever they could get it, which meant we were all culpable in adding to the noise because we were churning out more, we were getting faster, more furious. We were, at the end of the day, looking for as many eyeballs on pages to sustain our businesses through advertising and to prove our worth. And so there was a real arms race in all of that. And that has reached a kind of really counterproductive kind of moment for news. And particularly as the advertising market proves itself not to be the long lasting business model for news, we're all turning towards our readers for revenue now. Most news organizations are now pivoting towards a reader revenue strategy, which means being much more keyed in to what your segment of the audience that you really want is really interested in. And so I think that is a kind of a healthier place, because you're not kind of repeating what everyone else is doing and putting all this noise out into the digital space. People talk about content pollution this work. But in terms of the overall problem, I think there's a limit to that strategy, because you'll see in that strategy a lot of news organizations at the moment doing content reviews and reducing the amount of content they're doing. They realize that their readers and their audiences don't want to be bombarded as much. So they're reducing, but that is a tiny speck on the back of the internet, because there's so many different sources of information out there. So we can't clean up the internet, but we can clean up our own backyards and our own relationships with our specific audience. And I think that's where a lot of the focus is now. And for Tortoise, Tortoise is a kind of very extreme version of that. It's a startup, a new news organization that looked at all the problems in the media and set out to do something very different. So the motto is slow down and wise up. So we're all about slow journalism, spending a lot of time digging into the subjects that we think our audiences are really going to care about and giving them the space and time to report it properly. But we're also different in another way, that we're open. So rather than spending our reporting time churning out lots and lots of content, we spend most of our reporting time listening. And we have events not dissimilar to this, where we bring our members and experts and ordinary people together into discussions about the stories we're working on. And that's how we want to open up news. And the kind of unintended but brilliant consequence of that is that we get huge engagement. On news stories, you're looking at kind of 1 minute if you're lucky, 4 minutes if you've won for the year in terms of attention time. In conversations with our readers, people are staying an hour and then continuing the conversation afterwards. And it's a much richer conversation and way to produce journalism, I think.
So if we were to use the traffic analogy, maybe you are a riverside walk where people turn off the beaten path and go along there and spend some quality time with other people. I don't know if Johann's going to be able to think of some sort of continued traffic analogy for me as well.
Well, yeah, but it's also, the difficulty is that we were founded to cut through the noise by doing that long form journalism that actually explains what's going on, rather than just firing off headlines minute by minute. We're trying to get underneath and explain. But we're working against a whole ecosystem that is now built around firing off messages and a huge churn in information. So actually finding ways to keep people's attention is really the hardest thing about it. That's not what the digital ecosystem is set up to do at the moment. But we're finding it's what our audiences are really craving.
So Johann, do you have a traffic analogy for me, or don't feel you have to? I am just joking.
I'm processing this in the back of my mind, and a little bulb will go off if I find one. But in the meantime, let me maybe try a different analogy. Solving that noise problem in corporate communication is really that's a key mission for Slack. That's in many ways why we have built our platform. And don't forget, we all come from that noise problem isn't new. It certainly isn't new in corporate communication or in communication inside a company. Yeah, we have for the last 20, 25 years all lived with email. And what is the problem of email? Well, we get, I certainly used to get 200 to 300 emails every day and spend probably 2.5 hours of my day on that. And still it was extremely unsatisfying, because all that email that I was working on, that were not emails that I wanted to be sent to me. It were other people who sent that to me. I really gave up the sovereignty over where I spent my time and decided sort of what information I deal with. And even more annoying, the majority of conversations in the company were still not available to me. And remember, these conversations are where the real intellectual property of our sort of companies are. It's not glossy presentations or Word documents. Yeah? It is the conversations, the emails. And I don't know, I'm making this up, 95, 96, 97% of all the emails sent in the company, I had no clue of. So I was spending an awful lot of time on information other people told me I had to, and I was not getting the information I wanted. And that is what we turn around by really putting communication in open, transparent channels. So now, other than where it really has confidentiality needs, is open and accessible to everybody. Of course, now many people turn around and say, God, Johann, you just made the problem even worse, because now there is much more information that is accessible. And that is, of course, where we at Slack spend so much time saying, okay, let us now provide you with the tools, the automatisms, the structure that allows you to select out of that open and transparent channel the information that you think is important for you at this point in time. And so the idea is really we go from an indiscriminate push of information to a controlled pull. And that is how we help keep that noise under control, yet make you better informed and your communication more efficient.
So I don't think that my colleagues in the events team know this, but when we went into lockdown, we switched to producing The Economist by Slack. So the way that it works on Thursday mornings for us now is there's a hangout, there's a 6-hour hangout with all the section editors, but there's also this sheaf of about 30 Slack channels, maybe 20. So one for each section, one for pictures, one for charts, one for everything, you know, and it's actually quite efficient. So you're sitting in your bedroom from 6 a.m. or your office or wherever you are. And, you know, these things used to be trays. They used to be red trays on tables. And we don't think we're ever going to go back. So, you know, they invited you before they knew that. So this isn't just a corporate plug. Marian, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to push the first polling question. And then while our viewers are reading that, then you and I can talk about what your take is on this noise question. Okay, so we've got, are you worried about the downsides of social media and its effects on polarization and trust in society? And you can say everything from very worried to not at all worried. But anyway, let's continue this conversation about noise, Marian.
So I probably see it a little bit differently. I think that we've come to a place where we're going to all need to learn how to graze and only hear what we need to hear. It's one of the bad sides of this world in terms of we resort into our echo chambers. But I also think we're going to have a huge ability to tune out and kind of go into our own world where we can manage to batten it down and participate in those conversations that matter to us, evaluate that data point that matters to us, and disregard the rest as just clutter. So I think part of becoming an organized human is going to be to absolutely be present but be absent, whether it's online or in the real world.
You might be an unusual person, Marian. I think many of us might aspire to this, but might feel we're not capable of it. I mean, I don't know what you think that says about you.
I'm not saying I'd be great at it. I'm saying that that's going to be part of the new normal. Just like a decade ago, a new normal phenomenon was you needed to raise your kids to have thick skin because in the age of social media, the amount of bullying, and that sounded very, very far-fetched a decade ago, certainly 15 years ago. And today, it's a basic tenet of parenting. And I think learning how to just zone out or tune out is going to be the next extension of the mindful movement, but it's going to be to really hone your listening so you don't hear what you don't need to hear. You're not bothered by it.
I wonder if young people are already learning to do that. I mean, is that part of the multi-device thing, you know, that children, I mean, I look at them, they've got their phone, they've got the telly on, they've got, you know, something else in the background. Is that something you see?
It certainly is part of it. And I think another part of it is even the way our politics are all going, where we manage to only read or only digest or only absorb from television or radio or podcasts what we already things that were reconfirming the biases we already had. So we've already learned that behavior in terms of taking out what we don't want to hear. But yes, I think young people are masterful at it. Most importantly, they're doing 5 things and you say, what are you doing? And they say nothing.
Well, that's actually a very good segue to the answers to our poll, because part of that is about the effects on polarization and trust in society. Would you like to push through the answers for me, please? Okay, so people are really pretty worried. So their answer to, are you worried about the downsides of social media and its effects on polarization and trust in society? Nearly everybody said either very worried or fairly worried. So that was 85% between those two. And I think we got 0% not at all worried. Polly, you're in the news media, and yes, Tortoise, I think, always tried to produce things that are long enough that you could give various sides to a story. But how do you see this polarization playing out in the media and in news?
I think what Marian was saying about echo chambers and people selecting kind of their own points of views and not being open to challenges is right. But there's something I heard in what Marian said and also what Johann was saying, that we almost have a responsibility now to curate our lives in a very kind of rounded way. So what social media are we following, but also what are we following on social media so that we're hearing both the people we agree with and the people we don't agree with? What platforms do we have open in our lives kind of hour by hour that suit the moment you're in? Which of the Slack channels are you in at what point? It's like this enormous curation job to manage the information you're receiving from all different places. And I think kind of to maintain boundaries in your lives, but also to educate yourself and hear alternative points of view. I think it's really important that we do what none of us were really used to before digital, which is we become our own editors of all the channels and all the sources of information that's coming into your life, and you have a kind of curation job. But the thing we do at Tortoise that kind of feeds into this idea of polarization is the listening. So through the events we have, which are like open news meetings, when we invite all these different voices into our newsroom to influence the journalism before we do it, what we're trying to counter are those moments in 2016 when the editors at Tortoise were sat in their newsrooms running the BBC and the Times and the Guardian. We came from some really big news organisations, and very few of us saw the Brexit vote coming and the Trump vote coming because we weren't listening enough to other points of view. And I think that was the lesson of 2016 that a lot of the news media have been really focused on ever since. How do we hear different voices? How do we represent different voices in our journalism so that our journalism is better and not just painting a picture of the world as we want it to be, but actually truly reflecting the world?
Marian, I have no idea what polarization looks like from somebody who's in communications. I mean, what Polly was saying made a lot of sense to me. I think we went through a lot of the same things in every newsroom since 2016. What does polarization mean to someone in your part of this online noise?
So it obviously depends on whether, if you're asking me a question as it relates to working at Philip Morris. Obviously, there are those who are firm believers in a harm reduction movement, and thus they can hear messages that we share around science and innovation, around authorization from the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera. And there are others that are caught up in ideology and simply can't hear because they've already turned us down or tuned us out. And then there's this other ambiguous thing of, as a spokesperson, as a PR person, as a communicator working in a tobacco company, I'm a never smoker. So it's almost hard to get people to believe just that basic fact before you move on to whatever my message is going to be. So I think in the land of communications, absolutely people falling into echo chambers, and you need to decide the politics of your brand, the politics of your executive brands, etc. So there's lots of new work to do. It makes it much more interesting than it was a decade ago, but there's lots to figure out.
That is such a positive spin on it. I would have thought that companies don't want to have to choose their politics. You're automatically cutting off, in a country like America, half of the entire population if you have to pick your politics.
I don't know if I mean politics, liberal and democratic, so much as we needed to speak out against systemic racism after the murder of George Floyd. You had a moral responsibility. And so I think politics very much kicking in. And so you have to. There's no choice left.
Yeah. Johann, maybe you're able to just, be a calm, serene engineer working on a communications tool and polarization just doesn't even affect you, or is that wrong?
Yeah, if I think about trust, to come back to that point, something that Polly said early on really resonated with what I'm seeing, which is we ultimately need to empower our employees. If we think about communication in the enterprise, I think what is really important is to get away from that top-down hierarchical approach where we think we know what our employees need to read, need to spend time on, need to talk about, frankly, need to do, and go more to a empowering approach where we are saying it is the employees who really choose, who are closest to the problems, and who therefore know what to focus on, how to communicate, with whom to communicate. And I think in a not too roundabout way, that is actually also addressing the trust issue, because we are just saying, you know what, guys, you are responsible for that yourself. And you cannot, the times where others do that for you are over you. It is part of your own responsibility. Yeah, and that is why we really think that the modern enterprise and communication in the modern enterprise must have such a focus on bottom up, on agility, and on openness. Yeah, and I think the times of the manager who thinks he or she is the linchpin of what is happening operationally every day, they are over. Yeah, the manager sets the first, that bottom up, and the agility and the openness, and that is what you really have to do. And if you do that right, and the people accept that and understand it is their responsibility, I think you will also address the trust issue. Yeah? And clearly, again, if you go back to Slack, and I guess it would be a fireable offense for me to not mention this, that is what we are the tool to do, so that people can take advantage and can take that approach to how they run communication in their enterprise and how they run. And again, they are way more productive. The most successful companies in the world are working this way, and that is why they are not afraid of the pandemic, because then you are also well set up for that.
So, Polly, this has some echoes for me with the idea that maybe more people in the newsroom saw things like Brexit or saw Trump coming, but maybe it was, because things tend to feed up, like it's quite a hierarchical system usually producing content. Does that have echoes for you?
Kind of. I was at The Guardian in 2016, and the people who at The Guardian were saying, look, this is going to happen, were two journalists called John Harris and John DeMockos, who ran a series there called Anywhere But Westminster, which they've done at that point. They've done it for 10 years, where they just go as far away from Westminster. They go into villages and towns and communities all over the country and test political ideas on local people. They do it through film. They make really brilliant films. And they were coming back from all over the country saying this is going to happen. And I think, I don't think it was The Guardian alone. I think this was at all news organisations, most news organisations, and certainly a place like New York Times were thinking this with regards to the Trump election, was that there was just a group think going on. There was just a kind of a set of reinforcing kind of questions and things being selected that, and you saw it most potently in the polling around Brexit, which was so inaccurate and had actually been influenced by kind of how the pollsters were talking about it together, really. And so I think kind of group think is the enemy. The thing that I was just thinking about what Johann was saying about producers and kind of the broadcast kind of model of communicating compared with the kind of digital curated kind of model that we're in now. It puts a lot more kind of responsibility on the end user to kind of curate their lives. But it also, I think, within corporate settings as well as news settings, I wonder whether Slack can also create some of those silos and echo chambers of people selecting into the conversations they want to be involved in, selecting out of others. I just wonder whether there's a kind of flip side of that. And I'm desperate to ask Johann, and this is just from kind of personal experience, kind of how do you stop channels proliferating? I think Slack is brilliant on its own, but when you add email and all the other channels, WhatsApp and other things people are getting, it gets overwhelming. So I'd love to ask Johann that as well.
So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to get Johann to answer that, but what we'll do is we'll put the second polling question up first, and then Johann we can talk about that while our viewers are considering what their answers are. Okay, so this question is, do you believe advancements in digital communications technologies will bring people closer together or increase virtual interactions? Right, Johann, tell us how you stop your Slack channels having little babies and then multiplying like rabbits.
As a passionate father, my response would be, don't worry about the children. So maybe that's not the answer you want to hear, but I think, and this is going back to something we've said earlier, fear of missing out is really a thing of the past. And I do think, so what really means, if you think there's a channel you aren't interested in, well, I definitely encourage you, don't look at it. It has to do, again, with the responsibility and the fact on agile, the focus on agile and openness. Your communication is open. This is why you can look at that channel. But you want to build an agile organization where the employees are really the ones who decide what they need to focus on. And if you think you don't need to focus on what is discussed in that channel, well, don't do it. And as a tool, again, we are talking about controlled pull of information. We now give you a plethora of tools within Slack to support you in doing this. So you can mute channels, you can archive channels, you can exit channels. You can pop your list of channels where you're only notified on those. So you say, if a channel is important for me, tomorrow's release, a certain topic, you write an article, you star it, then that will have priority in how you get notified, and that is where you go. And everywhere else, you go at your own leisure or not at all. Again, it is, you need to prioritize. That is nothing that Slack can do for you, but we can give you, and we do give you the tools that then allow you to very effectively put that prioritization in place. But in general, to come back to my opening statement, children are good. Openness and many channel is a good thing. Yeah, you want, just imagine this, especially in the current remote environment that we are in, and because of the pandemic, I think openness and agility are so much accelerated. They're so much more important because now all my team members sit somewhere else. The only way I can effectively communicate with them is if I'm putting a super focus on openness, and then I let them select what of that is important for them and be agile and coordinate amongst themselves without all the time relying on me or other management colleagues of mine to get stuff done. And that is what we're seeing. Like the companies who are really thriving in the current environment, they all tell us agility and openness has been massively accelerated in the pandemic, and they embrace it.
So let's have a look at the answers to our question. We have, do we believe in advancements in digital communications technologies will bring people closer together or increase virtual interactions? Well, 2/3 believe increase virtual interactions and 30% said bring people closer together, and a few people in between saying no change from now. I think if I'd been asked, I'd probably have said both.
I think it's really important to look at what both means, because the future is going to be a blurring where you're going to have very little to distinguish between a virtual interaction and a face-to-face interaction. But the important thing also is I think the companies that are thriving right now are those companies that put their employees first, the communities in which they exist next, and then commercial objectives third, because the people who felt protected and taken care of were able to mutate and rise into this new environment in a much, much better way. So it's way more than openness. For me, it was the injection of humanity. Corporations could no longer be soulless. Senior management had to become enormously soulful and respectful of the fact that we are all in this together.
You were quite an early enthusiastic for online, I think, Marian. I mean, you founded the first online market research company like 30 years ago. So I'm
probably the oldest native person, if you think of it that way. Yes.
So are you still enthusiastic, or do you feel that we've worked out everything that we can?
Enormously. I'm doing a master's degree in my own time at Johns Hopkins in government, and I think I'm getting the same quality education I got in the American Ivy League face-to-face decades ago. No, I'm enormously enthusiastic and feel very strongly. It's not that people don't need high touch, but there are so many things we can do through an electronic interface, and by sharing things with one another, by crowdsourcing, by crowdfunding, by participating one-on-one. I'm more optimistic than ever before.
Wow. Okay. Here's a question from one of our viewers, Catherine Monk, who says, where is the training for people to recognize the quality and rigor of information, say from open access journals without peer review, or just everybody's blogs and personal beliefs? We've talked a lot about curation, like effectively we're all having to become curators. Marian, you have the mic. So how do you learn to do this?
Well, no, it's a really deep challenge, and it's a moral challenge to teach media literacy. I think it's something our schools need to do. It's something our governments need to inject into core curriculums. And it's something that corporates need to do to ensure that their people have literacy so that they can be critical thinkers and critically analyze and review. Because you're absolutely right. Most data that's in the zeitgeist hasn't been through peer review. It hasn't been scientifically validated. I have as much fun watching the fact checking every morning after the night before a convention as I have watching each of the conventions. To me, this intention on quality and accuracy is going to be an absolute mandate across every institution and for individuals as well. We're going to need to demand to be more literate, media literate, critically literate.
Yeah. So Polly, I mean, you joined a new media organization which didn't have that brand that people, whether rightly or wrongly, say they trust. But also, you and I are both in an industry where trust is fading. People say journalists aren't trusted and they don't trust the mainstream media or whatever. How do we think about this issue of the quality of what we're accessing and how we can prove as journalists or as just general providers of information that we are trustworthy?
I think Marian is absolutely right. Media literacy has to be kind of at the heart of education, embedded across the curriculum, because it's so critical. So there's some really interesting research that comes from the Reuters Institute in Oxford, which has been tracking trust in the media since the pandemic started. And it showed this moment as the pandemic started where there was kind of a surge in trust in the media because everybody was so desperate for really proper information. So BBC in particular had a very strong kind of start to the pandemic where people were really seeking out the basic information. And then that has fallen right back now, and trust in the media overall has declined again. And I think that's symptom from going from an emergency situation where people were looking to brands that they trust to now the debate is very much in the politics of it all, and it starts getting more disputed. Was it right? Was it wrong to do what we've done? And I think that kind of falls back. But I think what that research hasn't done is looked at individual brands. And I think people feel differently about the media than they do to individual brands. And that's still the kind of opportunity for news brands to be really kind of seizing a moment. You asked about Tortoise and about a new brand. It's been very interesting to watch how Tortoise plays in various algorithms. And I think that's something we've not touched on here. Yes, it's down to individuals and to vet their content, but actually there is I think a moral obligation on social media platforms to really factor in trusted brands in different ways to the algorithm and to be transparent about how they do that. But with Tortoise, you've seen it really rise up Google rankings, which does take into account things like trust, and you can see it kind of proving it's worth it. But people are coming to us because we're not giving them noise, we're giving them analysis and a deeper understanding. So our members are very much aligned and trusting in us to take us and make sense of this very complicated situation.
I've got an actually really beautiful question here from one of our audience. I think it's almost poetic. I need to count the syllables, but it would take me too long. It's nearly, whatever, it's 23 syllables for a Japanese poem. Are we still able to communicate? Are we listening more now? So imagine this coming into my inbox just in its purity and beauty on its own. I mean, what do my panelists think? Are we still able to communicate at all? If someone asked you a question like that out of the blue, would you say yes or no? Any of you?
I think I would answer that by turning on its head and talking about listening. Are we able to really listen and select through what we're hearing at the moment? Yeah, I would think about that in terms of listening, because there's a hell of a lot of communication going on, but are people understanding more as a result?
I think you've written the second verse of the poem there, Polly.
You know, I would want to add, though, that after what's happened in terms of race, especially in the US, but certainly globally, we've all learned we have no choice but to listen, because to project our own life experiences onto what's happening doesn't give us enough thoughtfulness. So listening, I think, has become a huge priority. And I think that people value people today who sit back and listen and ponder. Look, we embrace slow cooking. We've embraced slow news, as Polly's been talking about, but I also think we're going to embrace slow thinking, where people take the time to ponder something and put that pondering as a priority in their day.
Well, Polly is moving from a news organization that's based on that premise to about the fastest news she possibly could. So I don't know if that's because she feels she's done enough pondering.
No, well, I'm moving to be MD of PA Media in the UK, which is the UK's big news agency. Actually, it's about trust as well. The news agency is the most trusted. We're trusted across the industry. All of because we're an agency, we don't serve audiences directly. We serve other news organisations who buy our content. They all trust us. And you'll see PA as a kite mark of trust across the industry. So that's something I feel is really important. I still kind of fundamentally believe at the heart of any news, whether it's fast or slow, is meticulous, verified reporting, not getting things wrong. And when you do get things wrong, being very transparent about it and having an open line of communication with your audience. So for me, it's just about accuracy and trust.
So, Johann, I was going to ask you this question, which came in from Leonard Levy, I think. Has this new work approach effectively resulted in a burst of productivity and savings for most businesses? Time savings, cost savings due to less physical, in-person meetings? The cumulative savings must be in the trillions. I mean, you touched on this with the question of not having to travel. But is your impression that it's actually increased productivity overall?
I think this really depends by company, but I would very much agree that there is a whole slew, like a very broad set of companies where activity has increased. It certainly has increased in the short term, because yes, you are saving on things like travel. I think you are also, in general, seeing something which we sometimes call the last gasp of analog. And I think you actually, Helen, yourself gave a brilliant example of that when you talked about the trays that used to be on your desk. Yeah, there are still a lot of processes where paper is involved, where whiteboards are involved, where indeed trays are involved. And these processes have all been highlighted in the last several months and have all become obstacles to companies working effectively in this remote environment. And they are being weeded out now, one after the other, by much more resilient, robust, agile digital processes. Very much like yourself, the trays being replaced by Slack channels. And I think here, long-lasting productivity increases for everybody, even in a post-pandemic environment. Of course.
I think that's right. I think the things that never seemed worth dealing with, well, now you've dealt with them.
Yeah, and now we are really getting to a sort of end-to-end scalable digital work process. If you are a car manufacturer,
so look, I'll come back to you, Johann, to say we put up the last of the polling questions, because it's related. If you've switched to remote working, do you find that you're working more? And I know working more isn't the same as productivity. It's actually the opposite. So I wonder to what extent people feel work has just expanded to fill the time available. They're doing the same amount and it's not so squished. What do you think? Do you think that, sorry, you started to say something about car manufacturing. Maybe you want to tell me your analogy while our viewers are answering the polling question.
What I just wanted to sort of acknowledge there, and that is that, of course, there are situations when you have people which are sort of on the workflow manufacturing cars. There you have, of course, seen a decrease in productivity. Yeah, but even they, I think, when they come back, will come back into a more productive world. Sorry, the question was?
No, it's okay. What would you say? Would you say if you switched to remote working, do you find you are working more? What would you answer to that? No, I'm not. But it requires discipline, because indeed you need to sort of sit down and compartmentalize between your private life and your work life, and you need to have some very clear set boundaries. And yes, and that doesn't require training and discipline, but I'd say 2 or 3 months in to working remotely, I feel I had figured this out. Yeah, and I was really sort of saying, okay, here are certain times in the morning, there's a certain time in the middle of the day. So my kids are sort of now in charge of family life. We have 2 working parents. And so we said, kids, you do lunch, you do breakfast, and you are responsible for getting the parents off their desks at 7 o'clock. And so they have not only the freedom, they actually have the marching order to come in at 7 o'clock, which for somebody in the digital industry is reasonably early, and drag the parents off their desk. And it works well. Yeah, and so I think you need to you just need to set the right culture, and then this can work as well as before. Well, let's see what our viewers said to the poll. If you switch to remote working, do you find you are working more? What did people say? Wow, an exact tie between working more and working the same amount. So very few people are working less, and then there's the 8.1% who did not switch to remote working. I think a lot of people have found the work leaking out into extra time there. Right, let's have a look at another couple of questions from our viewers. Let's see. how do you balance listening to views with reporting news? Because often reality and perceptions are not aligned. This is from Paul Leach. And I'm guessing that that's mostly for you, Polly. So how do you balance the two? You're listening to views and you're reporting news.
So I think within the Tortoise model, what we do are listening events called think-ins, where we bring together these voices. And in that, we're hearing whatever evidence, experiences and views people are bringing. So it's a mixture of all of those things. At Tortoise, we say that we still hold the pen. So we write the journalism that comes out of that. So you're not just absorbing people's views as facts. But when you think back to what was missed in 2016, it wasn't evidence that was missed on kind of whether Brexit was the right thing or not. You can say we want about the quality of the debate, but that wasn't what we missed. We missed a sentiment in the country. We missed a feeling behind Brexit. So actually the sentiments, feelings, the views of people that even when they're not rooted in fact, which very often they're not, it's important to understand that and not adopt it as truth, but to understand the complexity of what a country is going through that listening. So I think it's still our job as journalists to distinguish between fact and opinion, but to reflect that in a more nuanced and real way.
So this is a question maybe that anyone in the panel might like to pick up, which is how do age or general other differences affect the ability to communicate electronically? That's from Mark Zukowski. Anyone want to respond to that? Anyone have any feeling for how personal differences are interacting with this new communication environment we find ourselves in?
I think that older people feel a considerable amount of pressure to gain the technical skills they need to have at hand to be able to use all these new tools. But at the same time, if they're beyond little kids or teenagers in the house, they're a little bit freer to expand their day to build more skills. So I think there's certainly, I find that on our teams, those that are most unhappy were the youngest single folks who were kind of socially isolated in both their social lives and their work lives. And so they suddenly found themselves very much on their own. And I think those are the people we felt we had to listen to the most in a way.
Yeah, we found that that's certainly true. And but also, I mean, I'm impressed that Johann's children were co-opted in this way. And I think Polly, from her expression, was also astonished. It was the people who had a couple of young kids at home and two working parents who really, really seemed to be drowning during all of this. But anyway, that's not a question about communication skills, really. I just wanted to not let it fly past that one of my panelists somehow had the world's most useful children. There's a question here for you, Marian, again. The tobacco industry is not like other industries that can connect directly with customers through social media platforms or advertising. How do you cope with this situation? What do you do to try to talk about things like smoke-free?
Well, we can't connect with customers. We can't connect with consumers. We are in a position to share our corporate messages, and our corporate messaging, obviously constrained in different countries in different ways, but I'm mostly talking about Anglo-American right now. And I think the important thing is we never put product first. I mean, it's not what we're out there doing. At least my teams are focused on building awareness of harm reduction, the need for new scientific methodologies and findings to be accepted, and to try to simply ask people to engage with us in a way that reflects the changes we've made over the last decade. So I don't think we feel as constrained. You have to become more creative. You have to become smarter and more sensitive in terms of how you're going to share your message, and it can never be a monologue. When you're in a sensitive industry, you need to engage in a dialogue or a trialogue and really listen to what the other side has to say.
So we're coming towards the end of our panel. We still have a few minutes for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out some interesting questions that we haven't got to yet and look for super short answers. I like this one from Leonard Levy. Is man's best friend truly his dogma? Is the social network aggravating this trend? Anyone want to give me a 1 or 2 sentence answer to that? Polly, go on.
Yeah. I think yes. I mean, we talked about before about those echo chambers and how they've developed in social media. Actually, just to counter that a little bit, on digital, we talk about that a lot, but you actually find, and again, this is Reuters Institute research, people read more widely on digital than they did offline. There's more information available. So it's more complicated than that, but overall, I'd say yes.
That was very good for somebody who was put on the spot. And I'm going to put Johann on the spot with this one. Based on the new normal for many firms, what are Johann's thoughts on conducting effective performance appraisals and evaluation? So I don't know that's a Slack question particularly, but I guess you have to do them. That's from Shivraj Pamal, sorry, I misread without my glasses. Are you doing performance appraisals at all? And how does it work?
Yeah, so we clearly in the current environment where people have so much newness to cope with, where people have family members that are part of risk groups, etc. We clearly acknowledge that and encourage our team members by saying, guys, you need to first take care of yourself. And at times that will come at the expense of performance. So to do rigid performance reviews in the current environment, I think is we don't do it. Having said that, I think it does highlight that culture becomes ever more important. Yeah, we see that those teams that have a joint sense of purpose, that are focused on collaboration, that are well aligned, that they really pull each other through the current situation, and very often performance actually goes up because of that. And hence, from that perspective, I'm out there that is not just, it's not always negative. Again, culture is ever more important. And if you manage that well, performance will be strong in the current environment.
I'm going to just ask each of you one short question. Marian, what's your favorite thing about social media?
24-hour clock. I am never bored. I'm never alone. Right now, I'm here in Switzerland without my family. If I want to get into a conversation, I want to read something, I want to connect with something, it's available whenever I want it. So it's a social life on demand.
I think that's the answer for somebody who's very, very good at managing her time, because that's exactly what I find is my least favorite thing about social media, to be honest, is that it fills in the interstitial space. Polly, what do you love? What do you love about the internet or about social media?
Just the power of connection and being able to connect with different people, different backgrounds, same backgrounds, you know, just that power of connection and the fun that people find through that as well. I was a really early Twitter adopter, and I missed those early days where it was a much more gentle, lovely place. And I still have connections on Twitter who kind of fight for that kind of open and just open and accessible kind of connection. And I love that.
And what about you, Johann? What do you love?
Yeah, I just think it's tremendously empowering. Yeah, we can do all those things that we couldn't do in the past. And yes, digital transformation has been on the way for a long time, but I think it has again been really accelerated by the current pandemic. And so again, I always come back to that sentence I said at the beginning. Yeah, the office is no longer the gold standard of productivity. It is about the combination of the office, how you work at home, and the tools, and to be empowered to do that and to really have these productivity gains. I think that's extremely rewarding and very exciting.
And so I think I'm going to answer it too. That's the moderator's prerogative, isn't it? I think for me, the exciting thing is the way that you can pick something, like really a slice that's very sideways through life, which could be like chess or something like that. It's not chess for me. And then meet people all over the world who you just absolutely would never have intersected with before this all came. So, you know, if you choose the right way to use it, you are broadening your horizons and not narrowing them. Well, we have less than a minute left to go, and it's my job to try and draw out some themes from what we talked about. some of the things that I noted down while we were talking, I don't think I'd heard articulated so well before about how in this age of communication, each of us has to become our own editor. So, you know, whether you know you are or not, you are actually your own editor. You're choosing what you listen to, and you're choosing where you go. It's up to you if you live in a bubble. It's up to you if you get too many different sources. It's up to you if you can't trust what you read. And then I think I'm a bit inspired by Marian's attitude to time management and her sort of, you know, this is the way it is, so I'm just going to have to make it work kind of approach. And I might try and think about how I can make that happen for me. And then finally, this question about working in teams, how we can work in teams differently and how we can keep these sort of momentary teams that pop up in a Hangout or pop up in a Slack channel, and how we can keep that, you know, when you need it, just for as long as you need it. And then it closes and we go off and do something else. That'll be something else I'll think about. And I need to thank our sponsors once more, Mission Winnow, and thank all our audience for coming and listening to us, and say that from half an hour after we finish, you're going to be able to rewatch this if you want on the website for the event. And thank you once more to my panelists. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.